Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today, to our audience here in person and our audience online. My name is Rebecca Pincus. I am Director of the Polar Institute here at the Woodrow Wilson Centre, and I am delighted to host this conversation this morning, a conversation with Canada's territorial premiers. The Wilson Centre was established in 1968 to be Congress's think tank. We are chartered by Congress to provide nonpartisan policy analysis to the U.S. government, and we've been doing so for the last 50 years. This event fits squarely within that mandate, and I'm delighted to introduce today our three guests. We are honored to have Northern Canada's three territorial premiers. Comprising almost half of Canada's landmass, the three territories play a critical role in Canada's relations with neighboring partners in terms of commercial growth through northern industries, and critically, these days, in terms of defense against adversaries and other threat actors in an increasingly challenging Arctic security environment. Without further ado, I will introduce our three guests. The Honorable Ranj Pillai, Premier of the Yukon. At my immediate left, Honorable R.J. Simpson, Premier of the Northwest Territories, and Honorable P.J. Akeeagok, Premier of Nunavut. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us this morning. Again, I know you've traveled a long way to be here. We've had a challenging weather situation in Washington this week, so I appreciate you braving that, although I'm sure you're used to it. You've been probably laughing at us from your hotel rooms, which is fair. And I'd like to kick off by just inviting the three of you to offer some welcoming and some introductory remarks in order. So, Premier Pillai, please lead us off. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. Thank you to the Wilson Centre, first of all, for giving us an opportunity to come and share some thoughts. We've really been working very closely together, the three of us, and we're colleagues, but we're also very good friends. And you know, we carry on work as Northern Premiers that a lot of leaders have done from the North for a considerable amount of time. And we continue to try to ensure that we amplify the story of the North, but also we're at a critical point in time. And this is something, you know, that a lot of individuals here in the room have focused on in your work. But for us, you know, we've kept a close eye on a number of these topics that we're going to cover today. And now we're seeing at home Canadians waking up to the fact that there needs to be a real focus on the North, how important the North is to the future of Canada, but also what role it plays in the future of the world as we move forward, and what's going to happen from a security standpoint, from an investment standpoint, from a development standpoint. So, look, I'll be excited today to share a little bit more in detail about the Yukon, our relationship with the United States, and that we have the third longest border, which a lot of people don't know, about 750 miles, 1,210 kilometer border with Alaska, and a very significant relationship there that we'll get a chance to talk about. And we'll talk about the you know, the opportunities that we have to share with other regions because of the governance structure. So we have the highest concentration of self-government agreements, modern treaties with Indigenous governments, and that plays an incredible role in how we govern and how First Nation governments work directly with us. And that's everything from co-developing policy and legislation right through to how we look at the focus on opportunities for development. So thank you for having us today, and I'm excited to share some stories with you.
Thanks so much, Premier.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here.
Oh, sir, would you mind getting a microphone?
All right. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. I'll start out by talking a bit about the Northwest Territories because it might be the least familiar place to an American audience. So the Northwest Territories, it's north of the 60th parallel. That's our southern border, and it goes up to the Arctic Circle, or sorry, the North Pole. It is twice the size of Texas. We have two of the continent's 7 Great Lakes fully within our borders, Canada's largest river, and we have really a treasure trove of natural resources, critical minerals, lumber. We have, along with the Yukon, we share the world's largest tungsten deposit. We have the highest grade zinc deposit. We have a number of these things which are the world's biggest or the world's most within our borders. However, we lack a lot of the infrastructure that you find in southern Canada and the United States. That has been a hindrance to getting those minerals out of the ground. But I think that with this new focus on the North, we are seeing a lot more interest in making those investments, those nation-building investments that we've seen across southern Canada. Similar to the Yukon, we are a primarily Indigenous territory. About half our population is Indigenous, First Nation, Inuit, and Métis. The entire territory is covered in land claims. We have some that are settled, some that are still under negotiation, but the future of the territory is it's going to be a very unique governance system in the world. We will have Indigenous governments self-governing themselves all around the territory, with the public government playing a yet-to-be-defined role in that space. And we are working towards getting there. Our mineral resources and land use planning system, it is co-governed, so there's input or governance from the Indigenous governments, from the territorial government, and from the federal government. So it's a very unique environment up there, and I look forward to speaking more about it as the day goes on. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Sir.
Yeah. First off, Udlakun, good morning. Very honored to be here with you all today. Thank you to the Wilson Center for the opportunity for us to be able to have a really deep discussion on something that's so important to all of us, which is really what we could do together as friends. So I'm very honored, especially to be with my really good friends, R.J. and Ranj, to really have that united front in terms of what we're doing. So Nunavut, just much like my sister territory of the NWT, is actually 3 times the size of Texas. It's 2 million square kilometers right in the north. It spans 3 different time zones. Just to put it into perspective, just the scale of the beautiful territory that I'm so fortunate to represent. We are as well Indigenous majority with Inuit, with the settled comprehensive land claims. And we actually just settled our devolution agreement, which has really brought decision-making power back to the people who reside there up in Nunavut. So it was a historic moment we just went through. But what better time we're in right now. Very honored to be down here in Washington to tell our story, to talk about what we could do together in terms of the opportunities. There's obviously challenges, but opportunities I think we have where there's an alignment in the Arctic, in the North in particular, of what we could do together. A few of them were mentioned, critical minerals, which I'll get into a bit deeper, where in Nunavut we have 23 of the 34 known minerals. 1 active mine of Baffin land, which is on Baffin Island, which is the richest iron ore deposit in the world, really in terms of purity and what we could do there. So just with that, very honored and look forward to getting into the discussions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you 3 so much for those opening comments. I'm going to kick off with a few questions, and I welcome your comments on any of them. Just to start off, your territories are part of the Arctic, and the region has been undergoing transformative change in the last several years, including geopolitical change. I'm thinking, foremost of the effects of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine 3 years ago. So how have global events and the increasing attention to the Arctic been felt in Canada's north? And, I'm happy to go in order as we started, or Premier Akeeagok, if you want to start us off, since you just spoke, please feel free. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. We are really at a very pivotal moment in time in terms of the focus really happening right now to the Arctic. In Nunavut, as I mentioned, we are 20% of Canada's landmass. We are at the heart of it is actually the Northwest Passage and the importance around what we're able to do there. The opportunity that I do see in terms of the deep relationship we do have with the United States, we right now share a very important relationship in terms of the NORAD, the work that we do to secure our continent, or North America. Right now we have Inuit who are a part of the operation and the maintenance of those very important sites, and it shows you just a deep relationship we have between the 2 very important jurisdictions, very important friends between Canada and the United States. And through really that important relationship is really an opportunity for us to continue to build upon what we're able to do. And the push around critical minerals is something that I know we've really shared of what more we could do together. As R.J. had mentioned, the importance around the lack of infrastructure we see across the north has really been a challenge for us to tap into, really the opportunity for us to fuel the world with what we have within the grounds. And through those opportunities is where I do see an alignment that could really shape our strength between the two countries.
Great, thank you. Gentlemen, would either of you like to comment on this question?
Sure, thank you very much. And so, of course, defense is a national jurisdiction, so we're not responsible as a territory for the defense of Canada, but the people of the North are the ones actually asserting Canada's sovereignty. We don't have a lot of hard infrastructure, hard defense infrastructure in the North. We do have some NORAD locations, some Canadian Armed Forces forward operating locations in the territory, but really it's the inhabitants of the land who are asserting Canada's sovereignty. Because of Russia's invasion, because of events in the United States, there's a lot more attention on the North. And we are feeling that. We're here at the Wilson Center. We are front and center at many of these types of events now, which was not the case a few years back. And that's because the world is looking at the Arctic for the security aspect, but not necessarily. We don't expect the Russians to come over the top and try and invade North America through the Arctic. That's just not feasible. What we do have, though, are the critical minerals that are essential for national defense, for the economy in general. It's what is needed going forward for manufacturing of advanced computing, of advances in medicine. All of these different areas require what we have in the North. And so we are seeing a lot of attention. I'm now seeing talk about defense in the North. I'm hearing industry speak up much more about the need for these nation-building projects, as P.J. mentioned. We need basic infrastructure like roads and highways just to get to where the resources are. And those are all dual-use pieces of infrastructure as well, because we have a number of our communities that are not connected by road access. They'll have winter road access when the ground's hard enough to drive over and when the lakes are frozen. But for most of the year, a lot of these communities don't have access. And with climate change and increasing natural disasters, both in frequency and severity, the need for that type of infrastructure for the safety of the community has become essential. We have the Mackenzie River in the Northwest Territories, Canada's largest river, and in many ways it's our highway. These communities are resupplied, their fuel, their food, their goods are shipped up Canada's largest river to the communities. The river this year the water is too low. In some places it's inches, and we're unable to get things up there. We've been experiencing massive droughts, and all of this speaks to why the Arctic's opening up, right? Because of climate change, because the ice is melting, things are getting more accessible. And so that's why the focus is on the North, and that's why we're able to have these conversations. There's so much potential in the North, and I think that Canada and the United States can both benefit from focused investments in the North for both of our mutual security. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir.
Thank you. I think I'll touch on two themes. One, really about that constant beat of the drum that's happened for a long time with Canadian leaders, First Nations leaders, when it comes to with a focus on the North, talking about ensuring that we have healthy communities, ensuring that we have investment in infrastructure, and that is a key part towards the sovereignty of the North. And that has, really been something that leaders have tried to educate federal leaders on. And, as we have, this has been growing more of a prominent conversation. It's become very apparent that there's need for nation-building projects. When you think about the Yukon, the largest infrastructure projects, the Alaska Highway, which gives you the opportunity to drive from Alaska to Miami to San Diego. Most people don't know that. It goes all the way to the, really to Alaska. And then we have another road that was built previous to that, the Dempster Highway, which we share with Northwest Territories, which again, you can drive from, we could leave here today and we could drive to the Arctic, and it's a direct road access. So these were built with a lot of ambition and vision, many years ago. In some cases with big disruption to communities, so you have to learn from how they were built and make sure you do it in a different way. So that's part of the conversation. But the other part of the conversation is around security and what has happened, as you stated, from the European conflict. Our government was focused, really in changing the conversation before the situation in Ukraine. As we started to do planning in the region, we looked at historical areas where there's opportunity for potential defense infrastructure. There's areas in the Beaufort where studies were done going back to the Diefenbaker years, but really there was a lack of focus, whether it was naval ports, road build-out, or connections to Alaska and our collaboration. So some of the things that we've done, we were a bit frustrated, to be open, and I've had good discussions with a number of defense ministers about this, but just how information was flowing to us as leaders. So you would see something that would happen in the Pacific Ocean, whether it's 1,000 kilometers away. Your constituents want to know that what's happening. They don't want to just read about it in the news. So we tried to change the relationship with Ottawa in a good way to work together. So we brought in a former leader from NORAD, a number of really strong, well-respected academics, and we put together our own Arctic Security Advisory Council, which came up with their first report this fall. So it's really a grassroots approach towards how Canada and regions that are friendly can work with the North. What is needed from our perspective when it comes to some of the early warning work that we can do. How do we prepare our communities? So that's part of the work we've done. The second thing that's changed for us is now we're working with Canada. We're funded to build a think tank that will work on Arctic security, but also foreign interference. So we've got a number of agencies across Canada, CAF, which we've been speaking with, and others who are committed, as well as academic institutions both in Canada and the U.S. And the concept's really for us to be working very closely with our territories, our friends, and I know that both of my colleagues have aspirations to be building out other significant infrastructure over the next number of years. So we're all trying to figure out where we can contribute to the conversation, but also not that the conversation happens in Toronto. Not that the conversation is going to happen in Vancouver or Montreal, but the conversation is going to happen in one of our territories, and that we bring people there to understand the challenges, but both the opportunities. Lastly, when we talk about security, one thing that you'll hear, people will give you time frames about how long it will be until there's more challenges. The ice will be more they'll see ice melt and it'll be more accessible in the next 20, 25 years. So right now, this is decades away. Like if you take into consideration how long it takes to build a major infrastructure project in the Arctic, from multiple environmental assessments, even if you're fast tracking, right through to design and build out, and the logistics, building a port, whether it's in Nunavut or it's in the Yukon or Northwest Territories, is going to take 10 to 20 years. So we are behind when we take it into consideration the projections on what traffic will be there and what's already happening from other actors that we see starting to make their first moves into those areas. So I think it's very important that we focus on this now. We work with our communities to understand what they need, but also to have a forward-facing posture, and that we are active on our build-out.
Great, thank you very much. From that relatively high-level question, I'm going to zoom in for something a little bit more specific here. And Premier Pillai and Premier Simpson, I'm going to ask the two of you specifically. China announced last week that it will be imposing export controls on a number of critical minerals to the United States in response to the White House's latest tariffs on Chinese goods. Tungsten was included in that list. Your territories share one of the largest deposits for tungsten in the world at Mactung. Is there an opportunity here with this latest development?
Let's start. Absolutely. We've got 28 to 34 critical minerals. We've got a number of projects moving ahead with very strong support with First Nation governments. That tungsten deposit, our local teams and geological survey teams have known about this for a long time. There was early work done on it, and it's an incredibly important project with already investment that we've seen from both the U.S. and Canada into that project. But again, it's just one of many projects. I know, leave it to R.J. to talk about some of the other pieces that are there, but when you think of, you can kind of go down the list. I'll just go high level. When as an announcement comes out from China on another mineral or minerals that are being banned for export, we have them. That's the reality of this. And, but the infrastructure will be key. That area, we already have significant money that's been allocated towards the upgrade of that road that goes to Mac Pass. It's in a very remote area in the eastern edge of the Yukon. But these are opportunities. That deposit, as I understand, provides enough tungsten to support U.S. efforts for 50 years. So it's significant. But it's not just about defense. It's also about the advancement of technology, what's used in the tech space, what's used for a number of clean energy pieces of infrastructure that all are going to need that. So, we have to be thoughtful on how we move through these projects. Of course, our role is to represent our constituents, work hand in hand with the Indigenous governments that are there. But this is it's a very significant opportunity for our territories and for Canada, because inevitably everything that gets built in the north has some level of impact through supply chain to all the other provinces. So, it's an incredible moment.
Great.
Yeah, there's great opportunities for us to be reliable partners for the United States. We have, Canada's identified 34 critical minerals. The U.S. has their own list. The U.S. Department of Defense has their own list, and we have something from every single list. I believe China put export controls on bismuth as well, on rare earth elements, and we have those. And so if governments, if companies don't want to get them from the Northwest Territories, from the Yukon, from Nunavut, they're going to have to get them from China. And so it just makes sense to build upon our natural partnership. So I think that with this new lens on the world and on the Arctic, and with the new threats that the world is facing, it's as important as ever to have strong relationships between our two countries. And we've put that out there to the U.S. government that we want to have that partnership. We're open to it. Let's have the conversations. Let's talk. Because there is no two greater partners in the world than Canada and the United States. For hundreds of years, we've shared the world's longest undefended border, and we've been peaceful. Both of our countries have prospered because of that trade and that relationship, and there's no reason why we should stop that. That should continue into the future, and we're ready to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you. And Premier, do you have any thoughts on the sort of key critical minerals, perhaps, to add to this conversation? You did mention the Baffin Iron Project, and
Oh, absolutely. I think there's so much potential when you look at the north. The one common theme between the three territories is obviously infrastructure. That really is an opportunity for us to unlock the true potential that we do have. As mentioned, we do know we have a majority of the critical minerals that are known, but there's much more that just hasn't been explored upon. But really the ticket around the importance of unlocking the infrastructure is really where the target should be. And through that avenue, we really see from a Nunavut lens, I've mentioned the Arctic Security Corridor, which is really the Grays Bay Road and Port project that could tap into so much of the critical minerals that we're just talking about to supply the world, really, with the U.S. here as well. But it's those types of projects in particular that are being led by Indigenous groups. And in this case, we have the Inuit leading that project, which is so important when you talk about economic reconciliation and Indigenous people being at the table, being true partners, and really leading that. And I think it's an important moment that we're in to show our supports for these types of major projects where we could supply the world these very important critical minerals that we're all needing as we're transitioning into that green economy.
That's great. Thank you. I want to ask you about the U.S. state of Alaska. You're here in Washington, D.C. I'm going to ask you about Alaska. And, it's interesting, Alaska faces a similar set of challenges, you know, rich mineral deposits, but the infrastructure piece is always a challenge. And, you know, that's, I think, a shared point across Alaska and Canada, and even Greenland. And so I want to ask a little bit about cross-border relations with Alaska. On President Trump's first day in office, he signed an executive order to unleash Alaska's resource potential. And, you know, the Alaska delegation has been paying a lot of effort to jumpstarting some of these projects. But again, you know, there's always challenges around infrastructure, around transportation, energy. And so do you see any opportunities here? Can you talk a little bit about cross-border relations with Alaska and perhaps, you know, mutual benefit, ways of mutually benefiting from this interest in minerals and sort of taking a common approach to overcoming some of these hurdles? Thanks. And if anyone would like to jump in on that first, I'm happy to go in any particular order.
Sure, I can. I'll start. I mean, we have a strong relationship that we've been building over the last number of years. So historically, there's always been a connection. Coming into this role, I tried to make sure that I sort of kick-started some of the work with Governor Dunleavy, and I spoke with him Friday. I spoke with him before coming down. He's got a very strong relationship with the current administration. I think President Trump was there 3 times, I believe, in the first mandate. So getting a sense and a bit of advice coming into the week from him. We've worked closely with him and the U.S. federal government on having investment into the Yukon. So we, at a point where we weren't able to leverage dollars from the federal government in Canada, we had a commitment of over $45 million into the Yukon that are U.S. funds. The Alaska Highway has had support over the last number of decades through U.S. funding, and we've been able to keep that moving. It's frozen right now or it's in limbo as we watch what's happening with funding programs. So we hope that that'll be something that the current administration will look at as something that's important for Arctic security and for the relationship between the states and the countries. But it's a lot of connectivity. We have 2 other areas in Alaska are close to us, both Skagway, Alaska, which is very interesting. It's a small community of about 900 people. It has 1.4 million visitors in about 90 days in the summertime. It's the 18th busiest cruise ship port in the world. And we have a deep connection with our tourism sector with Skagway. And then there's Haines, Alaska. So we have 2 permanent borders that are used. And those communities really come into the Yukon a lot to spend time, shop, use services, maybe go to a dentist, whatever it may be. So there is a tight relationship. Overall, I think we all feel, my sense from the Alaska conversation and with the governor is, they feel disconnected sometime as well. And so they, they're trying to work more with the federal government. They have another institute there that looks at sort of the same discussion around defense, and it's within Anchorage. And I know our teams are sort of talking back and forth on ways to work together. When it comes to the economic prowess of Alaska, look, you've seen it. Like, it was a big move on the first day. There was a number of orders, I think multiple orders actually, that spoke to Alaska. And you know that this government wants to talk about their energy dominance is the words that are being used, and they believe that Alaska is the reserve in many ways to do that. So my sense is going to be there's a lot of development that's going to happen in Alaska very quickly. It's going to be both on the mining side and on the energy side. That, of course, also can affect us. We have long-standing conversations that have happened between community members both in the Yukon and Alaska because of fear of impact to the porcupine caribou herd, which is, about 125,000, I think, strong right now and very healthy, but they migrate back and forth across the border. And so a lot of our leaders, are watching what's happening right now with some of the announcements. But we do think that there's going to be really substantial investment and probably in commitments from the U.S. federal government. On the very last day, I believe, of the previous Trump mandate, he signed off on in order to look at a rail line that would come from southern through from Alaska and potentially even with partnership into Canada. So, my sense will be those projects will be back on the table. People will be talking about them, and they're really significant for, as an opportunity. And you talk about nation building and things such as that. That these, my feeling will be that these conversations are just around the corner, and with the ambition of this government and the ambition of Alaskans, we're going to see, a real sense of growth there, and inevitably there'll be impacts to us from that.
Thank you.
Thank you, and yes, I do see opportunities, if there's more attention on Alaska, more development, there are opportunities for the North, for the people of the North. We have a long history of oil and gas in the Northwest Territories. We've had an oil field producing for over 100 years. For the last quarter century, we've been the world's third largest producer of diamonds, and our history of mining goes back much further than that. So there is expertise, there's companies who can go and actually do that work. So if there's work in Alaska, that could bring benefits to the territory economically. There's also, it could pose challenges as well. Across the borders are, Indigenous people of the same family. So the Indigenous people of the North aren't divided by the national or territorial borders. They span across the Arctic, and so there are concerns about the impacts on things like caribou, which many people still use to supplement their income, supplement their diet. In some communities, you might have half the food, 3/4 of the food coming from the land, from harvesting on the land. And so any impacts to that could be very detrimental. There's also concerns about things like an oil spill in the Arctic. That is a difficult place to work, a difficult place to do cleanup. And so there's a lot of opportunities, also a lot of concerns, but I think they're all concerns that can be mitigated if we work together. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir.
Yeah, if I may, R.J. touched upon something I was going to reference, where you do have Inuit that do live in Alaska. I've been very fortunate to have visited Akeeagok myself, as well as Anchorage. But just a connection that we do have right across the circumpolar north. It spans all the way through from there to the Inuvialuin, to Nunavut, all the way to Greenland. So just a connection we have in terms of the family ties, the linguistic ties, the cultural ties are so deep. So the potential around what we could do together to support that's going to be critical. As we are starting to see a lot of interest in terms of seeing development happen, as mentioned by my colleagues here. So as that discussion is starting to happen, we are looking at ways where we could support one another. And it's through these nation-building projects that we've talked about that could really unlock creating healthy communities. I think it was R.J. who had mentioned that really at the heart of it is you have to have healthy communities to assert your sovereignty. And without healthy communities, it really is challenging, and it starts with infrastructure development that creates those opportunities. So with that in mind, the connection that's happening in Alaska, obviously there's a deep connection to wildlife. I'm a harvester myself. I'm a hunter. It really provides life to us. It provides meals to our families that are nutritious. But the connection we do have is very deep, and I think that's something that has to be respected as well. But to be open as well to see development happen. It's finding that balance, but it's consulting with the peoples that's going to be critical to unlock that true potential. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you raising that point. I was just recently in a conversation about minerals in the North, and I think the point was made that across the North, across Alaska, the Canadian Arctic, and Greenland, we see, the highest environmental and social standards for projects in the world, right? Because you have communities, whether First Nations, Alaska Native communities, that are empowered to make those decisions about their lands, and are exerting a very high level of scrutiny, and have a real care for the environment and the ecosystems and wildlife. And so it is in many ways a really unique place to develop a project, because again, incredibly high standards and empowered local communities, and that's really pretty rare in the world. We see so often mining pushed to places with low standards, problematic governance. So it's really unique, and I appreciate you highlighting some of the opportunities and some of the connections between Alaska and Northern Canada. Let's bring it back to security real quick. I want to make sure I get a question in there. We're obviously in an unstable period of geopolitical competition where we see China and Russia in particular taking actions around the world that undermine the global rules-based order. Russia is obviously a significant Arctic power. China has interests in the region, and we're seeing increased Chinese activity. I would note regular presence of their research icebreakers, for example, some attempts to execute strategic investments, and obviously a complex relationship between China and Russia that plays out in the Arctic region. And so I can imagine you and your residents are paying attention to those issues. So can you talk a little bit about the role of the territories and perhaps the Arctic in continental security? You're at the front edge in many ways. So can you talk a bit about what that feels like and what it looks like to you? And maybe we'll start with you, Premier Pillai.
When you say that, those opening comments around China having interest and Russia having interest, for the room, everybody has an interest. There's not a diplomatic team that doesn't stop at my office, whether it's an ambassador, high commissioner, consul general. You see the positioning and posture of a number of countries that have an Arctic strategy, and you're like, really? You have an Arctic strategy? I mean, at one point, I think it was India that tabled an Arctic strategy to me, and I was waiting for our foreign affairs in Canada to come out with a new strategy. I'm like, we have to kind of hurry up here. There's a lot of places that are coming to the table, and of course, with a focus on research or a focus on development or investment. So look, we see that and feel that, and that's happening all around us. The role of the territory, look, I think we have to be able to speak up. I know we probably get in the lane of the federal government when it comes to this, and maybe to CAF and others. We pushed. We're happy that we had an announcement this year to have a naval reserve that's being looked at. We felt there needed to be more of a presence. You hear about the Rangers, which is a great organization of community members across all of our territories. And in our communities, there's actually a wait list to try to be a part of that. So, and other folks want to have a more committed relationship with the Canadian Armed Forces. So we're happy to see other avenues. So we've committed to working with the Canadian Armed Forces on being able to identify infrastructure build out, provide space they may need so they can grow, and also to share with them our knowledge about. We do, as a territorial government, we do significant procurement projects. We just built a fiber line to team up with a fiber line that was built by R.J.'s government. So it was 777 kilometers long. It had 1,100 water crossings. We had to directionally drill under the Mackenzie Delta, and we did it during COVID. And it's built, and it's live, and it ties in. So, we have a pretty good sense of how to build projects, and our teams do, and we're building other pieces of significant infrastructure. So I think we do have an ability to share with the federal government and say, look, here's some things that we've learned. These are some practices that we think work. This is how you can build good partnerships. So in that sense, again, I think we have a role. And we have to figure out how to pay for the infrastructure. I think a lot of pressure goes on the federal government. To be fair to them, it's we know that there's a massive pressure. The premiers are putting pressure on the federal government to meet the NATO spending targets. We believe that needs to be done. We believe that investments in the North can meet that. But look, there's not a infinite amount of money, and so how do we figure out ways to build smart and build together to meet the targets, but at the same time, are we bringing in, private opportunities from Canadian companies? Are we reallocating or redirecting pension funds in Canada? It's a bigger conversation because it's a huge need. So when it comes to security, we want to be there to support the federal government, Canadian Armed Forces, and I will say this from my prerogative, though, it needs to be led by Canada. It has to be led by Canada. I think we're watching the conversation that's happening right now. I think, it's kind of like we're sitting in the room here all collectively together. Probably a little bit of concern about some of the statements that are made. We, as Northerners, our sense is, look, we will lead. We'll have Canada lead the build out in Canada's North and we'll continue to, respect the partnerships with organizations like NORAD. And lastly, I spent time with on the phone over the weekend with Bill Blair. We have a great working relationship, and he was on his way to go to Brussels. I mean, the conversations really look. Canada is in a better position than the U.S. to build out a modern version of an early warning right now because of the landmass that's there, and fill the gap that is in place right now in the Arctic between both Greenland and Alaska. And so that's a role we can play. We still have a prominent opportunity in the Arctic right now to lead some discussions and do that with U.S. military. But again, we're going to have to see what happens over the next couple of weeks or days. So,
Thank you. Good point. Premier Simpson.
Thank you. We'll see what this afternoon brings, never mind days. So the territory, as Ranj said, the security, that's a federal jurisdiction, but the territories do have a role to play in many ways. So we talked a bit about critical minerals. We're responsible for the permitting processes, the regulations surrounding mining, and those are critical for defense purposes. There's scientific research that we permit in the Northwest Territories. And so there's hundreds of international researchers who come to the territory to do research. And so we need to ensure that everyone who's doing that research is not doing it for nefarious reasons, that everything's on the up and up. So we play a role in that. The rangers, as Ranj mentioned, 2,000 rangers across Canada. And they really are the eyes and the ears on the ground who provide that situational awareness. And they're all residents of the territories. And again, as Ranj mentioned, advice to the federal government on what's actually needed. We have, as I mentioned earlier, we need a highway up to Inuvik. Inuvik's a very strategic location for satellite arrays. There's a forward operating location there. And so we are trying to get a highway built for our own purposes, but that highway would also be very, very useful, a very useful supply chain for the military in the event that they need it. And we have that expertise on routing, on the land, and very importantly, on working with Indigenous governments. Nothing's going to happen in the territory unless you work with Indigenous governments and they're on board. We're in some ways in an advantageous position. Much of North America was colonized. Indigenous people were really marginalized, but the North was, I guess, not as attractive to the early settlers as the rest of Canada, given how remote it is, how cold it is. And so I guess Indigenous peoples weren't steamrolled the same way, to the extent, I guess, that they were in the rest of Canada. And they have retained that power. And so we need to ensure that, that they're respected and that we're working with them, and that's where the territory can play a role as well. Thank you.
Yeah, if I may, we really are the eyes and ears of the North. So it's so important when we're talking about looking at the rollout, that we are at the table and that we are consulted throughout the process. And I think that's key to really unlock the true potential that we're talking about. But the Indigenous people as well as governments must be at the table as we are rolling out what that could look like. The few projects we talked about in terms of protection, obviously the Arctic Security Corridor is one where we see an opportunity for investments to really come in to really expedite those infrastructures. Because listen, when you look at the infrastructure that has been built across the country in Canada, for all the way from the East Coast right through to the West Coast, you see a railway that was developed to unite the country, to bring movement of people and goods, really to create their own economies. But the third coast has been forgotten, and I think we're at a point where we need to see investments to unlock that, whether it's for security or prosperity in terms of what we could do. And so I think we're really at a moment of time to really see what that could look like. And really, I've really appreciated the relationship we've had with Minister Blair, Minister Jolie in particular, who really has allowed us to participate in strategies that are coming out to ensure that our voices are factored into the national strategies that are coming out. We do respect that is within their space in terms of defense, but that Northerners have to be at that table to ensure that our inputs are being factored in and decisions that will impact our lives. And that's something that I really appreciated the openness we've had the ability to be able to have with both the ministers in particular as the strategies have been rolled out. But at this point, as my colleague said, it's changing by the hour, but it requires significant investment to happen to the north, and I think there's so much potential of what we could do there.
Great. Thank you so much. I have been dominating this session unfairly, and I'd like to spend our remaining time taking a couple of questions from our audience. If anyone's got a question, please, raise your hands. Great. We don't have name tags, but please, sir. If you could, yes, turn on your microphone and speak into it. Our online audience can only hear if you're speaking into a live microphone, so that's why I'm paying so much attention to this. Thank you.
Rebecca, good morning, everybody. My name is Jeff Reynolds. I'm from NATO Allied Command Transformation, based down in Norfolk, Virginia. And it's, I'll just say this first, from what you've said this morning has been music to my ears in terms of hitting the key strategic wave points that are of interest in terms of bringing a sense of seriousness and strategic thought to the Arctic as being a front line in a broader competition that we're experiencing right now. And to underscore from the Canadian perspective that really that area, I mean, Canada borders 14 nations if you want to talk about land and sea. Russia is 2.5 miles or 4 kilometers away as a border from the Arctic. We have the climate change aspects is not favorable to Canada as much as it is to Russia, where they're getting much more blue water. And the broader strategic concerns, if you listen to what's happening in the U.S. government, and listening to Joni Ernst, for example, 2 days ago, talking about how the Americans want to be the arsenal of democracy once again, and that is all foundational for, or critical minerals are foundational to achieving that ambition. So the fact that we're talking about infrastructure, we're talking about all of the key elements that support broader industrial engagement and the exploitation of critical resources in a sustainable way, absolutely fantastic. What I'm not hearing, and what I'd be interested to know is, if in an optimal scenario, what would right look like in terms of Canadian defense and deterrence, meeting and going beyond the 2% NATO spend that is so much a hallmark of the conversations right now? And what does that look like both in terms of military capability and capacity in the region? That's one question. And the second one is, broadly speaking, what role do you see NATO playing in that region? Thank you. It's an interesting discussion.
Two great questions. Who wants to jump on one or both of those first? So we've got a question about what right looks like and spending, and then another question on NATO's role. Thank you. Go ahead.
Look, I think there's a number of experts in the room, and concerning yourself and others that spend their professional career focused on this. Look, when I think about what is the possibility, you heard the premiers in the summertime. For those news outlets that are here, will remember that we went to the Council of Federation in Halifax and we asked for a 2% spend. And it wasn't because we just wanted to get in the lane of the federal government. It was because a potential Trump administration advisor said, if you're not there, you're going to be in a really difficult conversation around trade. Well, we're in a really difficult conversation around trade. So that was something that was projected, back in July. So it's not just about that. It's the right thing to do. It's the right thing for our country to be doing to contribute, and we have to understand how that can both contribute to the economy of Canada and our overall efforts. So I think you're not going to find any subnational leaders that I'm at the table with. I think there's alignment of really across from coast to coast to coast around that conversation, and 2% and beyond, and understanding that that's a significant amount of our increase in our investment. When it comes to the North, I'm still, to be open with you, I'm still learning how we fill gaps and then how we roll out True North Strong and Free. So we know that there's a $73 billion commitment in the new plan. There's a number of really significant investments, but when you go through that, for us in the Yukon, there's really no capital at all in the entire plan. Yet we have the only highway that goes directly from southern Canada to the Beaufort, and potentially one of the locations which we would probably be working with my colleague from the Northwest Territories on for a Western infrastructure in the future as a port. So it's something we have to keep an eye on, and we're saying, look, why are you not, there needs to be investment in our centers. We know there's probably my neighbors may see some really investment, but Whitehorse was historically had multiple elements of the Canadian military base there, it really helped in many ways develop the territory. So we think, a presence will be important throughout in the region. Do it in a thoughtful way. Likely, we're going to be in a position to need port development in probably a number of places in northern Canada, at least a couple. I think we have to make sure that we focus on, now I'm really getting out of my lane, but from what I've learned, submarines versus just what we need on ships, and that's because we are taking into consideration where we are really on cycles of ice and how we move through, but we're going to be able to need to support that. We look at what's happening in Alaska right now on some of the areas that they're looking to develop on their western coast, and I still think there's a real opportunity to be collectively working together and supporting our rangers, but also maybe looking at a presence over time of some boots on the ground, and to be thinking about how we fill the gap both on our protection off the north when it comes to our ability to respond and our ability to detect. So I think those are things that we have to be collectively working on together. The rest of the North is aware of this. The thing that changed was, I'll just quickly say, we hosted something called the Arctic Arts Summit a number of years ago. The first time was hosted in Canada, and the whole conversation was around this sharing of cultures across the North. And then on the sidelines, it was all diplomacy. It was all security, and so all of your Nordic regions are coming in, going, what are you doing, folks? Are you keeping an eye on what you need to keep an eye on? So, the rest of the world is watching and understands probably that we have to catch up on that. So maybe I'll leave it at that. I want to give some time for my colleagues.
Thank you very much, and I'll stay in my lane because, again, I'm not the expert on hard infrastructure that we might need there, but there's definitely a desire in the territory to see more military infrastructure, which is, that doesn't go without saying. I think it's probably reasonable to assume that maybe people don't want military infrastructure, but we've heard from Indigenous governments, from communities who've seen investments in the past and who want to see investments again in the future. And that's not to say Canada's not making investments. We're seeing hundreds of millions of dollars right now being invested in infrastructure in Nunavut, which is close to the Arctic Ocean. We're looking at expanding runways there, building some facilities in Yellowknife, another forward operating location. There's investments there in a facility for the Rangers that we spoke about earlier. And so we can be supportive of that, and we are supportive of that. We've also been supportive of Canada reaching that 2% NATO target. We were pushing very early on for that. And the comment was made that you're happy to hear that what we're talking about here. Well, we're happy the rest of North America is now also talking about this, because we've been talking about infrastructure, critical minerals, Arctic security for many years, and the rest of the world has finally caught up given what has happened. Hopefully not too little too late. Hopefully it's right on time, and we can move forward together. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for that question. On the NATO 2%, I don't think you've ever seen all stripes actually support the expedited approach to reach the 2%. You have the Liberals, you have the Conservatives, the NDP, but also the non-party members here in terms of non-political governments that we are as well. So to see that unity around what we could do to see that 2% is something I think worth noting. But it is something that we really do see of really focusing on building from within. I think for quite some time we were investing in outside our countries, but now I think there's a discussion that's starting to take shape of what we could do to build our strategic infrastructure that are dual use. One like the Grays Bay Road and Port that I referenced that really could potentially untap critical minerals, but also serve the Canadian Coast Guard. We talked about the potential risks of oil spills as an example. When you don't have the proper infrastructure, the marine infrastructure, the potential liability is there. And as we're discussing the climate change and the opening of the Northwest Passage being one, you will need to see these types of infrastructures in place to ensure that if a ship hits aground, that you have to be ready. When we care so much about the environment, about the wildlife that is in that area. So it's strategic investments like that where we do see an opportunity for the application of that NATO 2% spending. I know speaking with Minister Blair, Minister Jolie, Minister Annan, we are pushing and advancing these very important nation-building projects as ones where we do see the connection to the NATO 2%, but also creating economies for our communities. I'll use the Qikirtarjuaq deep sea port, which is the most eastern part of Nunavut, just right on the mouth of the Northwest Passage again, adjacent to Greenland, where there's abundance of fish right in our waters that could create economies for us, but also it really could have the ability to serve the Navy, or whether there's a potential search and rescue that needs to happen in the Arctic. It's those types of dual-use infrastructure that could really fit that 2%. So I really appreciated that question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we're just about coming up on time, and I want to make sure you all have a chance to offer some closing remarks. And so, I think as we head towards that, I'll ask you to offer any final thoughts, any pieces that you feel we haven't covered today, and, maybe a little bit of reflection. You're here in Washington, D.C. to carry a message from the territories. What is your message? What are there misunderstandings or misconceptions here in D.C. about Canada's Northern Territories that you're hoping to overcome? Do you have some top-line points that you want to leave us with on your way out today?
I think R.J. should go. Yeah.
Go for it, RJ.
Thank you. And so I'm not sure if there's any misconceptions about the North in D.C. I'm not sure if people know much about the North, actually. If there's much of a concept about the North. It's a faraway place. It's very remote. The people I speak to from, even southern Canada and Washington, D.C. are folks who've gone up there. Maybe they went on a hunting trip or they went to a fishing lodge. But that's not really the North. And so part of my job as a territorial premier is to really educate Canadians and Americans on the North and on what we have to offer. And so I'm really appreciative of this opportunity to have this discussion with this audience. And I look forward to continuing the dialogue in the months and years to come. So thank you very much.
Here, I'll give it to maybe a couple of comments about today, maybe a little more pointed. Look, we've all watched comments over the last week around critical minerals in the North. And sort of the concept, whether it was just floated to see where it would go, or focused comment around coming to Canada's critical to the North and looking at Canada's critical minerals and sort of having control of that. That's never going to happen. So the ecosystem where mining happens is about usually publicly traded companies, Canadian, U.S. companies, working with communities in a collaborative way, going out to markets, raising dollars, having agreements in place with processing facilities, and then producing products, right? That's really the ecosystem. So there's no place for a Canadian or U.S. government to essentially change the entire model of mining in North America. So I don't see that's going to happen, but I do see an opportunity for people to come and work with companies. We're seeing it right now. I'll give you one example. It's a great story in the Yukon. We're working very closely with the First Nation government. They're about to own the first critical mineral mine in their traditional territory, working with very sophisticated mining financiers to put a project out to market. And, I think that's going to be, we're going to see more stories like that, and we're going to see great partnerships. So that's how we feel in the Yukon. Critical mineral projects should be built. And it's not about, foreign governments owning mineral rights. Other than that, I think, please, this is something, the cycle of this conversation, for many of you who have spent a lot of time, it kind of rises and it's the flavor of the day, and then it goes away because of the topic or the challenges of the moment outside of the Arctic and outside of the North. It's really important collectively that we work right now to commit to long-term plans, because the next time that we come to the table collectively in a conversation like this, because something significant is happening, if we don't have the infrastructure in place, it could be really detrimental to the way that we collectively look at how we operate within the world. So I think we're in a really important time to seize that and for folks to push through. I've talked to academics over the last couple of days that I work with closely, and they've been through the cycle like 3-4 different times where everybody got excited about it and then sort of everybody calmed down and went away, but the challenges were still there. So, I mean, our job will be to continue to amplify that. And I guess in closing, I think to our hosts and that are here and our American friends, I mean, it's a tough time right now. I think, like, look at my own family. I've had, almost every generation of my family has served at some point within the U.S. military, fighting alongside the Canadian military. Like, it's a hard time right now in this discussion. When you think about generations, I know of my family across Canada having a role to play and living in the U.S. and sort of this conversation the way it is right now. So I guess we hope that the conversation will come down to partnership. It'll come down to collaboration. It'll come down to all of us collectively working together in a stronger way. If people want to sort of flip the relationship around to look at it differently, okay. Like, I mean, we can figure out if there's going to be a change, but like, let's hopefully have the same values at the foundation of wherever we land. So thanks again for giving us an opportunity to share some thoughts today.
Thank you.
Yeah, I too am very thankful for the opportunity to be here. It's really been one where it has demonstrated that we're all connected and that we need each other. I know with the three of us here, but also all the premiers that were here has really demonstrated just how integrated we are and how important that relationship is with what's happening around the world. But I'm very thankful that we've really put a spotlight to the Arctic. Because really, when you look at a common interests that we both have as two countries, it's one where we see the Arctic playing a key role around that, whether it's creating opportunity for prosperity or whether it's for defense or whether it's for security. But really, the North plays a critical role, and that it's so important to ensure that our voices are in there as Northern leaders to represent our people. So with that, I think the conversations that we've been very fortunate to have here have been very positive. It is one that I really treasure. It's one I think we have to keep building upon, not just for awareness, but really what could we do together. And there's been a real open, candid conversation I'm taking away from this trip to Washington, and something that I think there's an opportunity for us to keep building, to keep growing, to look at key areas. In particular, I know we've heavily looked at critical minerals, but there's tourism, there's fisheries, there's so many other sectors I think we could dive into in terms of what we could offer. But I think it's a great start in terms of building that relationship. Not very many people do know the North, but it really covers a significant part of Canada. Just Nunavut alone is 20% of Canada's landmass. It's, I believe, 40% of the coastline rests within the territory. So when you look at the scale and the importance Nunavut has to offer the world, it's one I'm looking forward to and contributing as we're going through, whether it's NATO spending, whether it's really seeing nation building happen that are really coming from especially Indigenous organizations, or Inuit in our case, where it's them leading and really taking charge of what destiny that they want to see. So it's important to factor them in and ensure that we see the vision that they have as well. So with that, thank you so much for having us here, and I really appreciated the conversation we had today.
Great, thank you so much. Premier Pillai of the Yukon, Premier Simpson of the Northwest Territories, Premier Akeeagok of Nunavut, thank you so much for joining us today.